statistically speaking, if you want to actually achieve the American dream today, that deeply ingrained cultural idea that no matter where you start out, you can work hard, play by the rules, and come out ahead,
Right.
you're actually statistically much better off moving to Denmark.
Yeah, I mean, it completely upends how we're taught to view the global economic hierarchy, really.
It does.
We grow up with this mythology of American upward mobility, but the data is telling a very different story about where a person born in the bottom 20% actually has a mathematical chance of reaching the top 20%.
And that tension, right, that broken promise, is really the engine driving our conversation today in this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Because we're pulling apart a massive 3-hour interview from August 2026 on the Diary of a CEO. The guest was the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, who is obviously a figure heavily speculated for a 2028 presidential run.
Right, which makes his worldview super relevant right now.
Exactly. So today, we're looking at the world through the lens of that conversation. And I want to set the ground rules here right away. Regardless of how you vote, his blueprint for 2026 is a masterclass in how modern political figures are trying to diagnose a broken machine.
Yeah, and we should be really clear for the listener here. We aren't here to cheerlead for his politics or, validate his critiques of rivals like Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, not at all.
We're taking a strictly impartial approach. We are just here to open up the hood of this argument, look at the engine, and see how the gears are turning across multiple global crises.
Right, like skyrocketing debt, a live war in Iran, the imminent arrival of superintelligent AI, and a totally paralyzed democracy. So let's unpack this.
Well, to really understand the architecture of this worldview, you have to start where the anger starts.
Okay, lay it out.
The interview diagnoses the current political rage not as like a sudden cultural phenomenon, but as a deeply logical response to an economic design flaw, one that's been calcifying for the last 30 to 40 years. The American dream shifting to Denmark isn't bad luck. The argument here is that it's a matter of deliberate policy.
Deliberate policy meaning the tax code.
Exactly. Specifically looking at how the United States tax code treats work versus how it treats wealth.
Okay, because the stark comparison made in the source material is honestly wild. The claim is that a multi-billionaire in America today is paying a lower percentage of their income in taxes than a public school teacher or, like, a firefighter.
Which sounds completely made up.
Right. I have to play devil's advocate right out of the gate here. We have a progressive tax system. The top marginal bracket is around 37%. So how is it mathematically or even legally possible that someone worth $50 billion pays a lower effective rate than someone making $60,000 a year?
It sounds like a pure left-wing talking point.
It really does.
But it actually comes down to the mechanics of modern wealth accumulation. It's a strategy often referred to in financial circles as buy, borrow, die.
Buy, borrow, die.
Yeah. The source uses Elon Musk as an archetype for this. So let's say you're a W-2 employee, like that teacher.
Right, you get a regular paycheck.
Your taxes are taken out of your paycheck before you even see the money. You're taxed directly on your labor. Now imagine you're a founder whose company goes public, and you suddenly hold billions of dollars in stock.
Okay.
That wealth is entirely on paper. If you sell that stock to buy a mansion or, a yacht, you trigger a massive capital gains tax event.
So you just don't sell the stock. But wait, you still need cash to buy the yacht? How does that work?
You go to a major bank and you take out a private, incredibly low-interest loan using your billions in stock as collateral.
Oh, wow.
Because it's technically debt alone that you have to pay back,
Yeah.
the IRS does not consider it income. It is a completely tax-free cash transfer.
That is insane.
You can secure a $50 million cash line of credit, live an extravagant lifestyle, fund new ventures, and never trigger a single taxable event.
And if the stock drops?
The bank might require more collateral or sell off a fraction, but the individual essentially bypasses the traditional income tax system entirely.
That is wild. It's like playing a game of Monopoly where the rules fundamentally change once you acquire your first hotel.
That's a great way to put it.
You suddenly get to bypass the ghost space entirely, ignore all the luxury taxes, and just collect tax-free cash from the bank directly on a private line of credit.
Exactly.
But here is the massive point of friction. If we aggressively target that wealth, as Buttigieg suggests, if we try to tax unrealized gains or cap these loans, aren't we risking driving away the exact innovators who build the economy? Don't we punish the people creating the value in the first place?
Well, the source pushes back on that by pointing to our own economic history. During the 1940s, 50s, and into the 60s, the United States had a top marginal tax bracket that hovered around 90%.
Wait, 90%? During the absolute height of the Cold War?
Yes. When we were the global poster child for capitalism battling Soviet communism, we were the ultimate capitalist enter. We built the interstate highway system, we went to the moon, we saw the greatest expansion of the middle class in human history, all while maintaining exceptionally high top tax rates on extreme wealth.
So the argument isn't that wealth itself is evil.
Exactly. The underlying philosophy is that extreme wealth concentration eventually jumps the tracks from an economic issue to a political hazard.
How so?
When economic power becomes so vast that it converts into unchecked political power lobbying, super PACs, buying massive media platforms, you start experiencing societal earthquakes.
Right, the system stops serving the middle.
Exactly, which leads directly to the other massive economic anvil hanging over this interview, which is the U.S. national debt.
Oh man, the graph mentioned in the source tracking the national debt from 1970 to 2026, it doesn't even look like a financial chart. It looks like the flight path of a rocket going into orbit. It just goes completely vertical.
To contextualize the danger there, the interview introduces Stein's law, coined by Herbert Stein, an economist from the Nixon and Ford eras.
Okay, what's the law?
It's brutally elegant. Quote, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. Unquote.
I mean, that's blindingly obvious.
Right.
The math dictates that the debt cannot rise at this trajectory in perpetuity without completely collapsing the currency. Therefore, it will stop. The only question is whether we stop it deliberately through painful reform or if the market stops it catastrophically.
Exactly.
The debt cycle right now is like using a new credit card to pay the minimum balance on 5 other credit cards. The music is still playing, the lights are on, but the interest is compounding in the background, consuming a larger and larger piece of your monthly paycheck until one day your card just gets declined at the grocery store.
Yeah.
So why do politicians keep opening new credit cards?
Well, the source attributes this to the mechanical reality of political musical chairs.
Musical chairs?
Yeah, look at the incentive structure of a politician elected to a 4-year term. Their entire political survival is predicated on what happens within those 48 months. If you, as a president or a member of Congress, spend massive amounts of borrowed money to fund popular programs, whether that's a massive tax cut or a sweeping infrastructure bill, the public feels good. The economy gets a sugar high.
You look like a hero and you get reelected. You pass the baton before the music stops.
You are structurally incentivized to completely ignore the 20-year catastrophe you're building because the negative consequences will fall on a future administration long after you've left office.
That is so dark.
If our leaders served 100-year terms, they would manage the Treasury completely differently because they'd be forced to live through the consequences of their own spending. But in our current system, the rational, self-interested move is to spend, be loved, and let someone else deal with the default.
Which forms a perfect, tragic bridge to the political reality we're living in right now. Because voters aren't stupid. They feel this.
Yeah, they do.
They feel the American dream moving to Denmark. They feel the billionaire tax loophole. They feel the debt suffocating the future. And when voters feel that their entire reality is rigged, they look for a completely different kind of leader. They look for a disruptor.
And the analysis of Donald Trump in this interview is surprisingly pragmatic, coming from a political rival.
Yeah, I thought so too.
The central thesis is that if a political and economic system fails a voter repeatedly, decade after decade, eventually that voter is going to cast a ballot for someone who promises to take a sledgehammer to that exact system.
Even if the guy wielding the sledgehammer is a billionaire who personally benefits from the tax loopholes crushing the middle class.
Right.
The voter's logic is fascinating. It's essentially, I know this guy might be flawed, I might not even like his personality, but the establishment has done nothing for me. This guy's promising to blow up the establishment. I'll take the chaos over the slow death.
And the source gives Trump a very specific piece of credit here, acknowledging that he successfully created the aura of having a, quote, bias for action, unquote.
Bias for action. That is a fascinating phrase to apply to a politician. That's a classic Silicon Valley startup founder mantra.
It perfectly describes the appeal, though. The federal government is notoriously mired in red tape. If you want to fix a local bridge, it might require a 19-step environmental review, federal block grants, state-level approvals, and 5 years of hand-wringing.
Right.
A leader who walks to a podium and says, "Nope, we're skipping the review, the bridge is being built tomorrow, and anyone who stops me is fired." That is deeply appealing to a public starved for momentum.
It's the CEO mindset applied to the Oval Office. And the source spends a lot of time contrasting the mindset of a startup founder with the mindset of a public servant. Founders start at zero. They succeed precisely because they are relentlessly disruptive. They look at a regulatory wall, decide it's made of paper, and just blow through it.
But the danger of applying that exact founder mentality directly to the federal government is a lack of institutional humility.
How do you mean?
Well, founders are often world historically brilliant at building one specific thing, a search engine, an electric car, a social network. But when you transition to governance, you have to possess the humility to recognize the vast oceans of things you do not know.
Oh, this brings up the Doge thing. The Department of Government Efficiency. That effort, led by Elon Musk to aggressively audit and slash the federal bureaucracy. The source paints it as an incredibly sloppy application of tech disruption to government.
Oh, totally. The critique is that they approached a multi-trillion-dollar federal apparatus like it was a bloated tech startup.
Right.
The source cites specific embarrassing failures, like public ledgers with massive math errors where auditors confused millions of dollars with billions of dollars.
Yes.
But more alarming was the chaotic firing of federal workers without understanding what those workers actually did.
Yes, the biohazard and nuclear safety workers. Think about the mechanics of this for a second. An efficiency auditor looks at a spreadsheet, sees a department managing biological threat containment, notices they don't generate any quote-unquote revenue, labels them as bureaucratic bloat, and just fires them.
Without a second thought.
Only to realize days later that someone actually has to monitor the nuclear material and the level 4 pathogens, and suddenly the government is scrambling to rehire them at a premium. The source claims that the government actually ended up spending more money after the Doge efficiency exercise than it did before.
It reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what bureaucracy actually is. We use bureaucracy as a dirty word for red tape, but in reality, a massive chunk of bureaucracy is simply a framework of protective laws.
Protective laws, right?
Those cumbersome 19-step processes exist because, historically, when we didn't have them, corporations dumped toxic waste into rivers, or experimental drugs killed patients, or financial institutions gambled away pensions. The friction is a feature, not a bug, designed to protect the public.
This brings up a critical fork in the road for you, the listener. Is the ultimate solution to this jammed-up country a disruptive CEO who violently breaks the rules to force progress? Or is it what Buttigieg calls a policy entrepreneur, someone who understands the Byzantine rulebook so deeply that they can manipulate the bureaucracy to actually get things done without causing a meltdown?
And the interview uses this to issue a stark warning to the political left. The argument is that if the Democrats regain power, the absolute worst thing they could do is just try to put everything back to exactly the way it was before the disruption.
Right, because the way things were before is exactly what birthed the anger that elected the disruptor in the first place.
Exactly.
If you just reset the clock to 2015, you're just resetting the timer on the same ticking time bomb.
You cannot reverse a disruption with a reversion to the status quo. The goal must be structural reform of the system itself. Otherwise, the anger will just metastasize into something even more destructive in the next election cycle.
So we had this profound domestic instability. A paralyzed, angry electorate looking for disruptors. Let's scale this up globally.
Okay, let's do it.
Because when the world's largest superpower elects a highly transactional leader with a bias for action who views foreign policy like a zero-sum real estate deal, the consequences scale far beyond American borders. The source paints a very grim geopolitical picture for 2026, anchoring heavily on a live, ongoing military conflict in Iran.
Yeah, the geopolitical reality discussed in the interview is one of severe, escalating chaos. It describes a U.S. military heavily bogged down in Iran and points out how the administration's stated goals for the conflict have entirely fragmented.
It's the classic fog of war mixed with political spin. The source outlines how the administration's initial justification to the public was a swift, quote, regime change, unquote. When that proved impossible, the rhetoric shifted to demanding unconditional surrender. And by the time of this interview in August 2026, the reality on the ground is that the U.S. is desperately trying to secure a ceasefire, and they're largely having to accept terms dictated by Tehran, not Washington.
And the interview takes great pains to emphasize that this isn't just an abstract foreign policy blunder happening thousands of miles away. It traces the direct mechanical connection between this war and the economic pain of the average American citizen.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
This is the ultimate geopolitical choke point. Iran, in response to U.S. military action, simply shuts down maritime traffic through this narrow body of water. A massive percentage of the world's oil supply flows through there.
Right, and the moment it closes, global markets panic.
The source explicitly connects this. Every day, Americans are seeing their gas prices spike, their grocery bills inflate, and their mortgage rates climb directly because of the ripple effects of this conflict. You, the listener, are sitting in the blast radius of this foreign policy decision.
And perhaps the most chilling anecdote in the entire 3 hours is how the administration allegedly handled the domestic PR nightmare of this failing war.
The deleted names. This stopped me in my tracks.
It's disturbing.
The source claims that the administration actually went into official defense records and deleted the names of 4 American soldiers who were killed in action. Why? To avoid a PR contradiction, the president had publicly claimed that a ceasefire was firmly in place. Admitting that 4 soldiers just died in active combat would destroy that narrative, so they just erased the fallen soldiers from the ledger.
It's a staggering allegation of narrative control over reality. And that kind of dysfunction heavily influences the source's analysis of the other major ongoing geopolitical crisis, which is the grinding conflict between Israel and Gaza.
The interview attempts to deconstruct that conflict by identifying 3 competing yet simultaneously valid principles that are currently crashing into each other on the world stage. Let's walk through them.
The framing is meant to cut through the extreme polarization. Principle 1 is the absolute necessity for the safety of Jewish people worldwide,
Which is currently under threat from a terrifying documented explosion in global anti-Semitism tied to the conflict.
Right. Principle 2 is the safety, self-determination, and dignity of the Palestinian people.
Who the source notes are enduring catastrophic violence, mass displacement, and what it characterizes as ongoing war crimes in Gaza and the West Bank.
Exactly. And principle 3 is the fundamental right to survival and security for the state of Israel itself, a nation still reeling from the most horrific, intimate violence against Jews since the Holocaust.
The core argument is that any functioning global order, any real diplomatic solution, has to hold all 3 of those principles as sacrosanct simultaneously. If you abandon any one of the 3, you just guarantee perpetual war.
Yeah.
But the source levels a very heavy, pointed critique at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu,
Right.
arguing that his current government is actively working to ensure those 3 principles can never coexist.
The critique hinges on the assertion that Netanyahu's political survival relies on an ideology of a greater Israel, a push for total control from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea.
Which structurally precludes the existence of a viable Palestinian state.
Exactly. Furthermore, the source characterizes the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu as a transactional frenemy dynamic.
Friendly, yeah.
The implication is that Netanyahu understands how to manipulate the transactional nature of the U.S. administration, keeping the U.S. militarily bogged down in the Middle East to provide a shield for his own domestic political survival.
It makes you step back and look at modern foreign policy as a clash of personalities, rather than the clash of ideologies. You have these massive singular egos, the Putins, the Trumps, the Netanyahus, dictating the fate of millions based on personal grievances or political self-preservation. It honestly makes me wonder, when the global stage is dominated by aggressive, volatile personalities, does it take a crazy person to negotiate with a crazy person? Do you need a disruptor to counter a disruptor?
It's a fair question, but the source offers a profoundly different framework for diplomacy. It argues that the currency of international relations is not ego, and it's not even trust. It is purely credibility.
Credibility over trust. Explain the difference there, because I think people use those interchangeably.
Trust implies a relationship, a belief in someone's good intentions. You do not need to trust the person across the negotiating table. You don't need to like them. But you absolutely must have credibility, meaning the other side must believe with 100% certainty that you will do exactly what you say you're going to do. If you threaten a sanction, they know it will happen. If you offer a concession, they know it will be honored.
And when credibility vanishes?
Diplomacy collapses into guesswork, paranoia, and eventually violence.
And the interview pinpoints the exact historical moment the U.S. detonated its own credibility in the Middle East.
Hmm.
It was when the first Trump administration unilaterally tore up the Obama-era Iran nuclear deal.
The mechanics of that decision are vital to understanding the 2026 war. Even if a subsequent U.S. administration, like the Biden administration, wanted to negotiate a tougher, more restrictive nuclear deal with Iran, the diplomatic well was permanently poisoned.
Right.
The Iranians and the rest of the world learned that a U.S. president's signature is only valid for 4 years. Why negotiate a treaty if the next president can just rip it up on a whim?
Makes total sense.
The source traces a direct causal line from the shredding of that agreement to the total breakdown of deterrence, leading straight into the current quagmire.
Okay, so the Middle East represents this immediate, kinetic, physical threat to global stability. But while the political apparatus is consumed by the Strait of Hormuz, there is a silent, permanent disruption happening inside heavily air-conditioned data centers.
Yes.
We're moving into the era of super-intelligent artificial intelligence and humanoid robotics.
The timeline discussed in the source is what makes this so urgent. This isn't science fiction set in 2050. The interview cites current public predictions from the CEOs of Anthropic, Google, and OpenAI.
What are they predicting?
The consensus among the people building this technology is that systems possessing general human-level intelligence, or even superintelligence capable of outthinking experts in any field, could arrive by 2028.
2028.
Yeah.
That is the next presidential election cycle, and they are openly warning that the immediate casualty will be entry-level knowledge work. If an AI can write code, draft legal briefs, and synthesize medical research in seconds, millions of white-collar jobs vanish overnight. And it's not just the knowledge economy. The source quotes Elon Musk predicting that physical robotics will advance so rapidly in tandem with AI brains that within a decade, physical labor itself will become a quote-unquote choice.
Which creates an economic crisis, obviously, but the source points out that it creates an even deeper psychological crisis, a crisis of human identity.
This is where Buttigieg gets very personal, drawing on his roots in South Bend, Indiana. He talks about the collapse of the Studebaker automobile plant in 1963. He explains that when the factory gates chained shut, the devastation wasn't just economic.
Right.
People didn't just lose their paychecks. They lost the core of who they were.
The source unpacks how uniquely tied to labor the American psyche is. In many cultures, your identity is your family lineage or your region or your religion. In the United States, when you meet a stranger at a party, the very first question out of your mouth is, what do you do?
And what you are really asking is, who are you? Your job dictates your social circle. It dictates your schedule. It's why you go to the union picnic. It's how you sponsor the local Little League team. It is the framework of your belonging in society.
So the existential question the source poses is, what happens to the human psyche when we transition into what he calls a Star Trek replicator economy?
I love that phrase.
Right. What happens when a machine can synthesize the legal brief, build the house, and harvest the food, and capital completely outpaces human labor? If society no longer requires your labor to function, who are you?
To grapple with that, the interview reaches back almost a century to an incredibly prescient essay by the legendary economist John Maynard Keynes, written in 1930.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Keynes looked at the trajectory of industrial technology and predicted that by the year 2030, humanity would become so ridiculously productive that we would only need to work 10 to 15 hours a week to satisfy all our basic needs.
The irony, as the source points out, is that Keynes was absolutely right about the math. We hit his predicted productivity metrics.
We did.
A single worker today, armed with computers and automation, produces exponentially more value than a worker in 1930.
But we don't work 15 hours a week. We work more hours today than ever before. We are exhausted.
It's so true.
The source argues that instead of taking the productivity dividend as leisure time, we just invented what it calls bullshit jobs. We spend our lives in endless Zoom meetings discussing the synergy of the Q3 deliverables. Or we spend 5 hours a day doom scrolling on our phones, wasting our most precious resource without adding any tangible benefit to human well-being.
The challenge of AI, therefore, isn't just surviving the transition, it's figuring out how to distribute the unimaginable wealth it will generate. The source explores some radical proposals to manage this.
Like what Bernie Sanders proposed.
Yeah, it brings up Bernie Sanders. Sanders has apparently floated the idea that because AI will displace so much of the public workforce, the public should demand a 50% ownership stake in these massive AI companies.
Wow, 50%.
The profits would be seized and redistributed directly to citizens to guarantee healthcare, housing, and a universal basic income.
The interview doesn't endorse the exact mechanism of a 50% government board takeover, obviously, but it leans heavily into the underlying logic of a public dividend. And the justification for this dividend is incredibly strong when you look at the mechanics of how AI is built.
Let's talk about the training data.
These trillion-parameter AI models did not materialize out of thin air. They were trained on the collective knowledge of humanity. Every book, every Reddit thread, every Wikipedia article, every piece of art that everyday people uploaded to the internet for free. We are the training data.
Exactly. And furthermore, the internet itself, the very infrastructure that allows these companies to exist, was created in the 1960s by DARPA, an agency funded entirely by American taxpayers.
It is the ultimate multi-generational public investment. The argument is that when a private company commercializes that public investment to the tune of tens of trillions of dollars while simultaneously making the public unemployable, the public is owed a massive dividend.
It makes a lot of sense.
But to enforce a public dividend, to manage a transition this profound, you need incredibly smart, incredibly resilient rules. And the source uses a brilliant analogy here. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration.
The FAA is highlighted as the ultimate success story of government regulating a highly complex, inherently dangerous technology. Think about commercial flight. It is fundamentally terrifying.
It really is.
You're putting hundreds of people into an aluminum tube filled with highly combustible jet fuel and hurtling them through the sky at 500 miles per hour.
And the FAA doesn't build planes. They don't invent jet engines. They just write an obsessively detailed, highly punitive rulebook to ensure that the companies building the planes prioritize human life over profit margins.
And the statistic Buttigieg drops from his tenure as transportation secretary is staggering. During his time overseeing the agency, 4 billion people flew on commercial airplanes in U.S. airspace.
4 billion.
The number of fatalities in commercial aviation during that period was 0.
0 deaths out of 4 billion passengers. You literally cannot eat a cheeseburger or walk down a flight of stairs with a 0 in 4 billion fatality rate. The argument is that AI requires an FAA-level regulatory apparatus immediately.
Right, before the plane takes off.
We want the miraculous innovation. We want the AI that cures Alzheimer's or solves nuclear fusion, but we desperately need the guardrails to prevent the algorithm from causing the equivalent of a civilizational plane crash, whether that's crashing the stock market, generating novel bioweapons, or deeply manipulating elections.
Yeah, the stakes are just incomprehensible.
Let me bring it back to the listener, though. Let's imagine the optimistic scenario. Let's say we get the SAA for AI. We secure the universal public dividend. AI is doing the grunt work, our basic needs are met, and we don't have to clock in for 40 hours a week anymore. How do we avoid the Wall-E syndrome?
The Pixar movie.
Yeah, you know the one where humanity abandons Earth and just floats around in hover chairs, morbidly obese, staring at screens and drinking milkshakes all day? If we aren't forced to work to survive, how do we find meaning?
Well, to answer that, the source turns away from technology and looks back over 2,000 years to the Stoic philosopher Seneca.
Seneca.
Yeah. Seneca wrote extensively about a bizarre human contradiction regarding how we value resources. We are fiercely protective of our money. If someone tries to steal a $20 bill from your wallet, you will fight them. You will take them to court.
But we are completely careless with our time. We will let an app or an argument with a stranger on the internet steal 3 hours of our day, and we don't even blink.
Even though time is the absolute only resource in the universe that you can never, ever get more of, the source argues that the AI revolution will force a total societal reckoning with how we spend our time.
Right.
If a machine can maximize economic output, humanity will have to restructure its value system to reward the things only humans can do, things capitalism currently ignores or treats as worthless.
Like caregiving. Raising children, taking care of aging parents, building community gardens, creating art just for the sake of connection. We will have to decouple our sense of worth from our economic output.
It's a massive cultural shift.
But here's the massive roadblock we keep slamming into in this conversation. To implement a public dividend, to build an FAA for artificial intelligence, to restructure the tax code, you need a highly functioning, visionary government. And as we established in the very first 10 minutes, our current democratic system is fundamentally jammed up.
It's just paralyzed.
It is paralyzed by polarization and extreme partisanship. So we arrive at the blueprint. The source outlines 5 massive pillars of structural mechanical reform required to actually fix the engine of democracy itself.
This is where the interview moves from diagnosing the disease to prescribing the surgery. Let's walk through these 5 pillars because they are mechanically fascinating. The first pillar is the total abolition of the Electoral College.
Okay, let's do an ELI 5 explained out. Like, I'm 5 on why the Electoral College exists and why the source says it has to go. Originally, it was built as a compromise to get slave-holding states to join the Union and as a buffer because the founders didn't entirely trust the general public to directly elect a leader. But today, the argument is that a simple popular vote just makes undeniable mathematical sense. The person who gets the most votes in the country wins.
The mechanical impact of abolishing it would completely alter how politicians behave. Right now, if you're a Republican running for president, you literally do not care about a Republican voter living in New York or California because all of those states' electoral votes are guaranteed to go to the Democrat anyway.
And a Democrat doesn't spend a single dollar campaigning for the millions of Democrats living in deep red Texas.
Exactly. Under a popular vote, every single vote is equal, regardless of geography. A politician would be forced to campaign to the entire country, addressing the needs of urban, rural, and suburban voters everywhere, rather than exclusively pandering to a few thousand swing voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan.
Okay, Pillar 2 is major Supreme Court reform. We've seen the court become viewed as a highly partisan weapon. The source suggests several mechanisms to fix this.
Like term limits.
Yes. One is implementing strict term limits for justices so every president gets a predictable number of appointments, ending the macabre death watch where justices try to time their retirements or literally die in office. Another is expanding the bench, or creating a balanced bench model where a certain number of justices are chosen unanimously by the other justices, forcing a moderation of ideology.
The third pillar is perhaps the most mechanically complex, but incredibly impactful: proportional representation in the House of Representatives.
Let's break this down because it sounds wonky, but it's vital. Right now, we have single-member districts, meaning in one geographic district, there is one election, and the person with 51% of the vote wins the only seat.
Right.
If you are part of the 49% who voted for the other person, you have zero representation in Congress.
Proportional representation changes the math completely. Imagine we merge 3 local districts into one larger megadistrict.
Okay.
Now, instead of electing one person, this megadistrict sends 3 representatives to Congress. Oh, I see. So if a conservative party gets 60% of the vote, and a progressive party gets 30%, and a libertarian third party gets 10%, the conservatives get 2 seats, the progressives get 1 seat, and the third party might actually have a path to a seat in a larger merged district.
Yes.
It shatters the absolute binary stranglehold of the two-party system and allows for a multi-party democracy where broader coalitions have to work together.
Which ties directly into the fourth pillar, the total banning of partisan gerrymandering.
This is the darkest art in American politics. Explain how gerrymandering mechanically decides an election before a single ballot is cast.
It relies on 2 techniques called packing and cracking. Let's say you're a state legislature drawing the map for Congress, and you want to ensure your party wins. You look at the voter data.
First, you pack as many of your opponent's voters as humanly possible into one single district. Your opponent will win that district with 90% of the vote, but you've quarantined them. Then, you crack the remaining opposing voters, spreading them out thinly across 3 other districts so they never have enough density to reach a 51% majority.
So you lose one district massively, but you easily win the other 3. The source highlights the absurdity of this, noting that because of gerrymandering, 90% of the races for the House of Representatives are completely uncompetitive.
The winner is mathematically predetermined by the map lines.
When a politician is in a completely safe district, they don't fear a challenger from the other party. Their only fear is being outflanked by an extremist in their own party's primary. It creates an incentive structure that rewards absolute radicalism and punishes compromise.
And finally, the 5th pillar, overturning the Citizens United Supreme Court decision.
Which would require constitutional amendment. The goal is to explicitly codify 2 things into the Constitution. First, that a corporation is not a living person. And second, that spending unlimited anonymous corporate money is not a protected form of free speech under the First Amendment.
Right.
This is the mechanism required to outlaw dark money. The billions of untraceable dollars from billionaires and massive corporations that currently flood our elections and buy policy outcomes without any public accountability.
Yeah.
But I have to step in here and push back hard.
Go for it.
Everything we just talked about, abolishing the Electoral College, term limiting the Supreme Court, overturning Citizens United, requires amending the U.S. Constitution.
Okay.
We are living in a country deeply divided at each other's throats. Getting a supermajority of states to agree on what day of the week it is feels impossible, let alone rewriting the foundational document of the Republic. Isn't this just a progressive pipe dream? A fantasy wish list that has zero basis in political reality?
It is a massive hurdle, undoubtedly. But the source addresses this exact cynicism. First, it reminds the listener about the nature of the document itself. We treat the Constitution like it was carved in stone on Mount Sinai.
Right, like it's untouchable.
But the very existence of the First Amendment, the right to free speech, and the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, proves that the founders explicitly designed the document to be altered. Amendment literally means to change or add to. It's supposed to be a living engine, not a museum piece.
But the division, how do you get 70% of the country to agree to change the engine?
This is the most revealing counter-statistic the source provides. We're told relentlessly by algorithms and cable news that we are a 50-50 nation bitterly divided on everything. But when you actually look at the data on specific major policies, that division is a mirage.
Really?
Polling consistently shows that 60 to 70% of Americans across party lines actually agree on major issues. Strong majorities want a higher minimum wage, they want universal background checks for firearms, they want reproductive rights protected, they want the wealthy to pay higher taxes.
The consensus already exists.
Yeah.
The public actually agrees on the destination.
The disconnect is mechanical. The current structure of the government, the gerrymandered maps, the filibuster, the dark money, the Electoral College, acts as a dam that actively blocks that 70% public consensus from becoming law. The 5 pillars aren't a progressive wish list. They are the mechanical repairs required to allow the existing will of the people to actually flow into legislation.
Okay, we have spent an hour talking about massive tectonic systemic change. But systemic change requires human beings to actually step into the arena and execute it.
It does.
In the final stretch of the interview, we look at the intensely personal journey of navigating this exact political meat grinder, using Pete Buttigieg's own life as the case study.
The interview paints a vivid portrait of how a modern political worldview is forged. It starts with his origins in South Bend. He is the son of a Maltese immigrant. His father deliberately chose to leave the Mediterranean to become a professor in the industrial Midwest, wanting to be a medium fish in a big pond. That choice rooted his son's perspective not in the coastal elite bubbles, but in the Rust Belt reality of factory closures and economic anxiety we discussed earlier.
But the most profound internal crucible he discusses is the process of coming out as gay. He talks about actively hiding his sexuality through his entire 20s. And you have to understand the specific pressure cooker he was in.
Right, the military aspect.
He was a military intelligence officer serving under the don't ask, don't tell policy. If he was outed, his military career was instantly over. Simultaneously, he was trying to launch a political career as a Democrat in deep red conservative Indiana.
The tipping point he describes is a stark collision of the personal and the political. He was preparing to deploy to a combat zone in Afghanistan.
Okay.
As part of that process, soldiers have to write a just-in-case letter to their families, a letter to be opened only if they are killed in action.
Imagine sitting down to write your final words, facing the very real statistical probability of your own mortality. He realized in that moment how utterly untenable his situation was. He realized he could be killed in a desert thousands of miles from home, having lived his entire adult life without ever knowing what it was like to simply be in love, just because he was terrified of the political and military consequences of his own identity.
It's heartbreaking.
He made a vow that if he survived the deployment, he would come out, regardless of what it cost his career.
It illustrates the intense personal realities that politicians carry into office. The source highlights another brutal example of this during the launch of his 2020 presidential campaign.
Right.
From the outside, the public sees a polished, historic campaign launch. From the inside, it was a nightmare. During the exact same week, he launched a national presidential bid while simultaneously trying to manage the city of South Bend as mayor. His father was dying of terminal cancer, and his mother suffered a severe heart attack requiring emergency surgery.
The mental and emotional bandwidth required to stand on a debate stage and argue about tax policy while your family is dying in a hospital down the street. It's unimaginable. And on top of that trauma, modern politicians are operating in an unforgiving media environment that has completely evolved. The source contrasts the historical black box era of public relations with the modern glass box era.
In the 20th century, a political campaign was a black box. The public couldn't see inside. The PR department would paint a beautiful, patriotic mural on the outside of the box, feed scripted talking points to 3 major TV networks, and completely control the narrative.
But today, thanks to social media, everyone has a high-definition camera and a global broadcasting platform in their pocket. You cannot hide inside a black box anymore.
The walls are made of glass.
Exactly. And if you refuse to show the public what is actually inside your box, the internet will just invent a narrative for you, and it will usually be a malicious one. The source argues that this is why true authenticity is the only currency left. It's why a politician has to sit down for a 3-hour unscripted long-form podcast.
You physically cannot rely on memorized talking points for 3 hours.
Eventually, your actual personality and worldview bleed through.
It's also why the source emphasizes the necessity of engaging with adversarial media. Buttigieg is known for regularly going on Fox News. He intentionally walks into the territory of his political opposition, fully expecting hostile questioning, because engaging in actual unscripted debate is far more authentic and ultimately more persuasive than just preaching to a choir of supporters on friendly networks.
Which naturally leads to a brief but incredibly candid discussion in the interview about the brutal reality of the 2024 election cycle. The source touches on the historic moment when President Biden, after visibly struggling with cognitive decline on a debate stage, was forced to step down from the ticket a mere 100 days before the election.
It's a delicate topic, but the interview addresses the mechanics of that pivot. While Buttigieg praises Vice President Kamala Harris as a strong, highly qualified candidate who stepped into an impossible situation, there is an acknowledgement of the structural deficit she faced.
The lack of a primary.
Right. An open primary competition, even a condensed, chaotic one, forces candidates to hone their arguments, build coalitions, and test their vulnerabilities under fire. By bypassing that process, the party ended up with less information and a less battle-tested nominee heading into the general election.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of presidential ambition. When you look at the sheer weight of what we've discussed today, knowing that the person sitting behind the Resolute desk literally holds the power to launch nuclear weapons, knowing their decisions dictate the outcome of Middle Eastern wars, knowing they have to figure out how to regulate artificial superintelligence before it collapses the job market, does pursuing that job require a terrifying, unnatural level of narcissism and ego? Or does sitting in that chair breed massive, paralyzing imposter syndrome?
The source grounds this philosophical question in constitutional history. It points out that the American system was explicitly engineered by the founders so that no single human being would ever hold this much terrifying power.
Right, to prevent a king.
They had just fought a bloody war to escape a monarchy, and they designed a system of checks and balances to prevent a king. Yet, over 2.5 centuries, through war, executive orders, and legislative abdication, the modern presidency has evolved into exactly what the founders feared: a singular, almost imperial figure wielding unprecedented global power.
It is a terrifying responsibility. And yet, regarding his own future, the interview manages to pin Buttigieg down. When asked about a potential 2028 presidential run, he admits that he is, quote, more inclined than not, unquote, to seek the office. It's a profound admission that despite the trauma, the paralysis, and the immense weight of the crises we've outlined, the cycle of political ambition and a deep-seated sense of duty is already churning again.
Because whoever wins the 2028 cycle will inherit the exact convergence of crises we have spent this hour dissecting.
Let's bring this all together. We started by diagnosing a symptom: the massive systemic economic inequality where the American dream feels like it was boxed up and shipped to Denmark, driven by a tax code that rewards wealth over labor and a national debt built on a 4-year cycle of political cowardice.
Yeah.
We saw how that deep economic frustration directly fuels the rise of political disruptors who promise to burn the system down. We tracked how that domestic disruption bleeds outward, fracturing U.S. credibility globally and trapping us in the blast radius of chaotic wars in the Middle East.
We covered a lot of ground.
We looked ahead to the existential, permanent disruption of AI arriving by 2028 and the psychological crisis of a post-labor identity. And finally, we outlined the specific mechanical structural repairs needed to fix the engine of democracy so it could actually process these challenges, all viewed through the personal crucible of a leader navigating the modern glass box political landscape.
And it is crucial to remember that this isn't just an abstract political science lecture. This is the exact architecture of the reality you are navigating right now.
Absolutely. Think about your own life for a second. If an AI can do 80% what you do at your job by 2028, how does your industry adapt?
Mm.
If the Strait of Hormuz remains contested, how much higher does your grocery bill get? These aren't just headlines. This is the water you are swimming in.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over, building on everything we've unpacked.
Hit us with it.
We have spent an immense amount of time talking about reforming the system, abolishing the Electoral College, fixing the courts, rewriting the tax code, all so human democracy can manage the future. But consider this. If artificial intelligence actually achieves superintelligence by 2028, as the leaders of the industry are openly predicting, the next president of the United States might be the very last human being to actually understand the global economy they're supposed to be managing.
Oh, wow.
If an AI can outthink us, outplan us, and outmodel us in every single domain, from logistics to diplomacy, does structural democratic reform even matter anymore? Or will we inevitably, out of sheer necessity, end up handing the keys of global governance over to the algorithms?
Wow. That is a heavy, terrifying, and fascinating concept to walk away with.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you. Always look for the mechanical gears grinding behind the headlines, and we will catch you next time.